Here's a 1990 photo of murderer Dalton Prejean with his son in prison, shortly before he was executed via electric chair for killing a state trooper. 12 years later, that same son, Dalton Prejean Jr., was convicted of the 2001 death of a 14-month-old baby. He's currently serving a 60-year sentence in the same prison that his father was executed in. Actress Tina Fey received her chin scar at the age of 5 when a stranger randomly entered her front yard while she was playing and slashed her across the face. The man was never identified nor seen again. A python from Australia became addicted to meth after living in a drug lab for several years. Police busted the operation before sending the snake to rehab for 7 months. In Japan, women are traditionally banned from entering a sumo ring under any circumstances. This tradition is so strictly imposed that in 2018, 2 women were forced to leave the ring, even though they were performing CPR on a mayor who had collapsed inside. There's typically an IQ minimum of 80 points to serve in the US military. But to meet the manpower requirements of the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army loosened up on this policy and began recruiting soldiers with mental disabilities. These men were known as McNamara's morons and died at 5 times the rate of other Americans in the war. This is also what the character Forrest Gump was based on. A suicide bomber in Afghanistan was thwarted by a stray dog which barked and snarled at the man, causing him to prematurely detonate at the entrance. The dog was then flown to the United States and appeared on Oprah before being adopted. But tragically, she ran away from home and was captured by an animal shelter which ended up euthanizing her by mistake. In 1943, Polish ballerina Francesca Mann arrived at Auschwitz. When ordered to take off her clothes, she did so provocatively to divert the attention of the guards. While the roll call officer was distracted, she grabbed his gun and shot the man in the head. She then managed to wound another guard before other prisoners joined her rebellion until they were all shot dead. While filming for Kitchen Nightmares in 2007, Gordon Ramsay visited a restaurant called Campagna in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. While there, he told the owner Joe Cerniglia that his business was about to swim down the effing Hudson River if it didn't change. Sadly, in 2010, Cerniglia had no choice but to sell the business after declaring bankruptcy, and days later ended up taking his own life in the Hudson River. Following the release of the original Exorcist, people were completely terrified of Linda Blair, the young actress who played the possessed girl Reagan in the film. She received hundreds of daily death threats as people often avoided walking past her on the sidewalk out of fear of being cursed. The Soviet Union built a massive stockpile of 45,000 nuclear weapons and then dissolved in 1991, leaving behind poorly paid guards who no longer had a country to hold allegiance to. Therefore, many of those nukes were sold to the highest paying bidders and have remained missing to this day. Actress Brittany Murphy and her husband both mysteriously passed away from pneumonia and severe anemia in their home only 5 months apart. Murphy's mom believes both of them were victims of toxic mold. Jonah Hill had to be hospitalized while filming The Wolf of Wall Street after snorting too much fake cocaine. In 2021, an 82-year-old man from Austria had the wrong leg amputated during surgery. The man was told he would still need his other leg amputated as well. The hospital said the incident occurred as a result of a sequence of unfortunate circumstances. Here's a devastating photo of a Colorado police officer distracting a little girl after her dad lost his life in a car accident. Judy Melanik is a medical examiner who identified hundreds of bodies after the 9/11 attacks, most of which were just scraps of flesh or pieces of limbs. She was called in August of 2002 because someone had found a foot bone on top of a skyscraper a quarter-mile away from Ground Zero. Photo on the right shows a Houston police officer reacting outside the home where Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in 2001. She started by holding 3 of her boys underwater in her bathtub until they stopped struggling. She then drowned her 6-month-old Mary, whom she left floating in the tub. Her last living child, Noah, soon walked in and asked what was wrong with Mary, then ran when he realized what was going on. But Yates quickly caught up to the 7-year-old and drowned him as well. Afterwards, she laid the lifeless bodies of her children together in her bed. She then called the police, repeatedly saying she needed an officer but refusing to say why. During the trial, the defense argued that Yates was severely mentally ill and not in control of her actions during the murders. She was in a deeply delusional state, believing she needed to murder her children to prevent them from going to hell. In 2006, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a high-security mental hospital in Texas where she remains to this day. Here's a 2021 photo of Alec Baldwin breaking down in tears after firing a prop gun that killed the director of photography on the movie set of Rust. The tragic incident happened as a result of catastrophic failures in safety procedures on the set. The woman who was responsible for checking the firearms was only 24 years old and had very little experience in her role. Rust was her second film as lead armorer since she had previously worked on another Western film called The Old Way, where she received multiple safety complaints from the cast and crew. She also admitted on a podcast that she felt overwhelmed and underprepared for her job on Rust. The live round that killed Helena Hutchins and injured Joel Souza was not supposed to be on the set at all. The production had a very strict rule that banned any live ammunition on the premises, and only blanks or dummy rounds could be used. But it was later revealed that some of the crew members used the same guns for target practice with live rounds during their off hours, and had failed to properly clean and inspect the weapons before returning them to the armory. These are the hands of Japanese serial killer Tsutomu Miyazaki. He was born with a rare birth defect that caused his hand joints to be fused together, preventing him from being able to bend his wrists upwards. Two Mice Eating Cheese is the name of London's smallest statue, which commemorates two construction workers who died in 1862. They were scuffling over a missing sandwich that resulted in both of them falling off the scaffolding. Turns out it was just stolen by mice. The movie Jaws directly contributed to a surge in shark hunting and a massive drop in shark populations. Author Peter Benchley deeply regretted writing Jaws, saying, "Knowing what I know now, I could never write that book today. Sharks don't target human beings, and they certainly don't hold grudges." Today, sharks kill only around 10 humans per year, but humans kill around 11,000 sharks every hour. A 34-year-old man with ALS completely lost the ability to move anything, including his eyes. When a brain chip finally allowed him to communicate again, the first thing he said was, "I need a beer." In 1977, 20-year-old Oregon woman Colleen Stan was hitchhiking to her friend's birthday party when she was kidnapped by Cameron and Janice Hooker, trusting them because they had an infant daughter in their car. Long before this, the couple agreed that husband Cameron could capture a slave to tie up for his pleasure, and he had decided on Colleen. For the next 7 years, Colleen was repeatedly tortured and kept locked in a tiny wooden coffin under the couple's bed for up to 23 hours a day. Cameron forced her to sign her life away to slavery via contract, and convinced her that she was being watched by a powerful organization called the Company, which he claimed would painfully torture her and her family if she ever tried to escape. One day, 4 years after being kidnapped, Colleen was allowed to visit her family by herself, but she didn't reveal her situation to them due to her fear of the consequences. Her family simply thought she was involved in a cult, so they didn't want to pressure her to come home, fearing that she would stay away forever. The very next day, Colleen returned for a second visit with Cameron posing as her boyfriend, but again, nothing was done. 3 years later, Cameron wanted Colleen to become his second wife, which was a turning point for his wife Janice. In August of 1984, Janice secretly informed Colleen that they weren't part of the Company, and Colleen managed to escape soon afterwards. In the months that followed, Colleen didn't contact the police but continued to call Cameron routinely to give him a chance to reform. But 3 months later, Janice reported her husband to police and he received 100+ years in prison. In May of 2020, UConn student Peter Manfredonia was having issues with his motorcycle. When two elderly gentlemen approached to help him, Peter pulled out a samurai sword and murdered one man while seriously injuring the other. He then circled around them multiple times with his bike before stealing another man's pickup truck and fleeing to his hometown. That's when he murdered his childhood friend and kidnapped the victim's girlfriend before driving south. Once he reached New Jersey, he fled the car alone and started walking on foot. Manfredonia's actions quickly sparked a massive manhunt that spanned multiple states and garnered national attention. However, it became increasingly difficult to locate the killer since this was during the peak of the pandemic, allowing him to easily conceal his face with a mask. After a week-long search, Peter was finally apprehended in Maryland. He was later diagnosed with multiple mental illnesses that caused him to suddenly snap. He received a 55-year prison sentence for his crimes and then apparently gained 200 pounds while in prison. In the case that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were left stranded on the moon, NASA planned on cutting off communication with them. They didn't want to record how the men chose to die, leaving them to either run out of oxygen or take their own lives with no further earthly contact. FDNY Ladder 3 was one of the first units to show up at the World Trade Center on 9/11. Its crew of 11 men sadly perished in the collapse of the North Tower, and now their truck is on display in the 9/11 Museum. In April of 2015, 28-year-old Shayna Sims gained access to a funeral home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She pretended to be a makeup artist to access the body of Tabitha Lynch. Apparently, Shayna resented Lynch and suspected that her husband had been having an affair with her. So as payback, Sims decided to mutilate Lynch's body, cutting up her face and removing multiple organs and chunks of her hair. Court sentenced her to 16 years in prison for unlawfully removing a body part from a corpse. In 2019, the wife of Tampa Bay Rays prospect Blake Bivens was tragically shot and killed by her 18-year-old brother. Their newborn baby and the woman's mother were also victims of the random murder spree, which Bivens found out about from a headline he saw on Facebook. The pitcher later posted, "2 days ago my heart was turned to ash. My life as I know it is destroyed." Canadian serial killer nurse Elizabeth Wetlaufer told her pastor that she murdered 4 elderly patients by injecting them with insulin, and the pastor kept his promise to not turn her in. Afterwards, she would go on to murder at least 2 more patients before confessing to police. In 2021, 20-year-old Alex Kearns ended his life after thinking he lost $730,000 while trading options on Robinhood. He apparently saw the negative balance in his account and didn't know where to turn. The day after his tragic death, Robinhood sent Alex an email stating that the trade had been resolved and he didn't actually owe any money. In 1987, police responded to Illinois father Russell Dardine's home after he failed to report to work. There they found the dead bodies of his pregnant wife Ruby and their son, who were both victims of a brutal beating. Ruby was beaten so badly that she prematurely went into labor, and even the newborn baby was beaten to death as well. Initially, Keith was the most obvious suspect until his body was found shot dead in a nearby field with his genitals mutilated. Serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells later confessed to the murders but was never formally charged, so the case remains cold. In 1980, John Favera, the neighbor of mafia boss John Gotti, accidentally ran over and killed the mobster's 12-year-old son Frank. Although it was ruled an accident, Favera went missing that same year and was never seen nor heard from again. Former mobster Charles Carneglia later claimed that Favera was abducted, tortured, and slowly dismembered with a chainsaw while he was still alive. His remains were then stuffed inside a barrel filled with concrete and dumped in the ocean. In 2010, the teenage daughter of Michelle Kalina came across something horrifying in her mother's closet: the decomposed remains of 5 babies. Over the course of 14 years, Michelle gave birth to at least 5 children, ending their lives immediately after they were born. She was sentenced to between 20 and 40 years in prison. When Frank Zappa was a child, he always played with the mercury that his chemist father brought home from work, often covering his entire bedroom floor with the element. But childhood exposure to mercury is now known to cause prostate cancer as an adult, which Zappa would end up dying from at the age of 52. In 1978, over 2,000 students from Pennsylvania tried to set the world record for the largest game of tug-of-war. But instead, the 2,000-foot rope snapped, releasing several thousand pounds of stored energy. Nearly 200 students were wounded, 5 had their fingertips severed, and hundreds more received second-degree burns. On the morning of October 9, 2020, 27-year-old Texas woman Taylor Parker was pulled over by a state trooper after driving erratically. She explained that she had just given birth to the baby on her lap, so they were both brought to the hospital. But upon examining her, doctors realized she hadn't actually been pregnant at all, and the true horrors began to unfold. It turned out that Taylor had a hysterectomy when she was younger and therefore couldn't bear children, which her husband threatened to leave her over. In response, Taylor spent 35 weeks completely faking a pregnancy, making herself look pregnant, faking ultrasounds, and even throwing a gender reveal party. Around the time the baby was supposed to be due, Taylor stabbed her pregnant friend over 100 times before cutting her baby out of her abdomen while the woman was still alive. Both the baby and her mother ended up passing away, and Taylor Parker was later sentenced to death for her unspeakable actions. In 2004, 11-year-old Japanese schoolgirl Natsumi Tsuji led her best friend into an empty classroom where she promised to show her a new game. That's when Natsumi blindfolded the girl and ruthlessly slit her throat with a box cutter until she bled to death. Natsumi then returned to her classroom covered in blood while still holding the murder weapon. Spanish woman Aurora Rodriguez conceived her daughter as an experiment to try and create the perfect human. Her daughter Hildegard was able to read at age 2, spoke 4 languages by age 8, joined law school at 13, and became a professor there when she turned 18. But when Hildegard eventually tried to gain independence from her mother, Aurora concluded that the experiment was a failure and shot the girl dead while she was sleeping. Aurora was later infamously quoted saying, "The sculptor, after discovering the most minimal imperfection in his work, destroys it." She was sentenced to 26 years in prison, spending most of them at a mental asylum. Jeanette McCurdy has described the relationship she had with her mother Deborah as both emotionally and sexually abusive. When Jeanette was 3 years old, her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent multiple surgeries and transplants. As a result, Deborah would perform routine vaginal and breast exams on Jeanette and never allowed her to shower alone until she turned 17. Living in poverty, her mother forced Jeanette into acting when she was 6 years old to financially support the family, and because Deborah had always wanted to become famous herself. McCurdy says that her mother was obsessed with making her a star and introduced Jeanette to a calorie restriction once she turned 11, leading to various eating disorders that Jeanette still struggles with, including anorexia and bulimia. McCurdy says that she refused to appear in the revival series of iCarly only because she didn't want to be reminded of her mother's abuse during the original show. Just last year, Jeanette released a book with the title "I'm Glad My Mom Died" 9 years after she passed away from breast cancer. In 2019, Cambridge University student Alana Cutlin tragically jumped from her airplane while returning home from Madagascar. She reportedly appeared normal while boarding the plane, but just 10 minutes after takeoff, she suddenly unbuckled herself before opening the door of the aircraft and jumping out without hesitation, falling nearly a mile to her death. Her family later stated that she'd experienced panic attacks in the past, and that she might have been suffering from a bad reaction to prescription medication. In 2012, 88-year-old Ilda Maciel died in the hospital after her nurses made a critical error while attempting to feed her. They accidentally injected chicken soup into her veins rather than into her feeding tube. In 2012, 23-year-old gaming addict Chen Rongyu died of a heart attack while playing League of Legends for 23 hours straight in a Taiwanese cafe. It took staff hours to realize he was dead since he fell back in his chair and his arms were still stretched out toward his mouse and keyboard. In 1998, Dana Carvey underwent open heart surgery to clear a blocked artery, but the surgeon operated on the wrong blood vessel. After spending 6 months recovering from the life-threatening botch, he won a $7.5 million lawsuit against the hospital and donated all of it to charity. In 2015, an Italian grandma accidentally sent 2 adults and 3 children to the hospital after making them hot cocoa that had expired in 1990. Pearl Jam's song Jeremy was based on the real-life classroom suicide of 15-year-old Texas student Jeremy Wade. He was released from a mental hospital once his parents' insurance money ran out, so he brought a revolver to class and shot himself in front of 30 students. In 2013, a collection of files revealed that the US government lobotomized over 2,000 veterans against their will after World War II. They were lobotomized for reasons such as PTSD, depression, schizophrenia, and homosexuality. 2023, 92-year-old dementia patient Tom McDonald poured washing detergent over his bowl of cereal thinking it was milk. After eating most of the bowl, he told his daughter he wasn't feeling well and was soon rushed to the hospital, where he later died from acute toxicity. While 33-year-old actress Carol Lombard was on a war bond tour in 1942, she won a coin toss that determined she and her group would return home by plane instead of by train. Tragically, their flight would end up crashing into a mountain near Las Vegas, killing all 22 passengers on board, including 15 U.S. Army soldiers. 28-year-old Caitlin Jensen's life was changed forever after just a routine visit to the chiropractor. She went to have her neck adjusted for stiffness, during which 4 arteries in Caitlin's neck were accidentally dissected, resulting in a horrible stroke. She was reportedly without a pulse for 10 minutes until she could be revived by doctors. Caitlin was left with nearly full-body paralysis, only capable of blinking her eyes and moving her left thumb. In 2018, 16-year-old Kevin Watkins was lagging horribly while attempting to play Xbox in his Georgia family's home. In an effort to improve the speed, he decided to change the Wi-Fi password to prevent others from using it and slowing down the connection while he was gaming. Soon enough, an argument broke out between Kevin and his mom, escalating to a point where his older sister Alexis had to step in to prevent Kevin from physically harming their mother. Tragically, Kevin placed Alexis in a strong chokehold and refused to let go despite his younger brother and mother begging for him to stop. By the time police arrived 15 minutes later, Alexis was no longer moving or responsive, but Kevin still had her in a chokehold. She had been starved of oxygen for a lengthy amount of time, resulting in extreme brain damage. Alexis was quickly rushed to the hospital, but was soon pronounced dead from asphyxiation. Kevin was tried for murder and sentenced to life in prison for the tragic incident. Just last year, actor Anthony Starr received a 12-month prison sentence after being involved in a bar fight in Spain. According to reports, he drunkenly assaulted a chef by punching him in the face and smashing a bottle over his head. Starr then allegedly told the man, "You've committed the mistake of your life and I'm going to look for you. I want to kill you." The victim received 4 stitches in the hospital, and Starr managed to avoid jail time by paying him $4,000 in compensation. Bears in Russia sometimes get so desperate for food in the summer that they've been known to rip apart cemeteries and feast on the corpses of the recently deceased. In 1967, Prime Minister of Australia Harold Holt mysteriously disappeared while swimming in Queensland. He was presumed dead the next day and his body was never found. Former football star Brian Banks spent 6 years in prison until his alleged rape victim admitted that it never happened. This was the emotional moment when his innocence was proven and he was exonerated. When former NFL safety Dave Durson took his own life in 2011, he left a note that read, "Please see that my brain is given to the NFL Brain Bank." He shot himself in the chest so that his brain would be preserved, and doctors confirmed that he was suffering from severe CTE as a result of all the head trauma from playing football. In 1989, 96 people were killed during a soccer match at Hillsborough Stadium in England after being crushed to death due to overcrowding, many of whom died while standing up. 22 years later, Stephen Whittle tragically became the 97th victim. He had sold his ticket to a friend who died during the disaster. Unable to cope with the guilt, he took his own life by jumping in front of a train in 2011. At Belmont Park in 1923, a young jockey named Frank Hayes suffered a heart attack and died in the middle of a horse race. His body, however, remained on the saddle throughout the race, and his horse ended up winning, beating the odds of 20-1. Therefore, this was the first time that Hayes had ever won a race, and the last.